You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 118. This podcast is dedicated to circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and foes, I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast. What am I doing right now? I'm like hitting these words very strangely. Anyway, host of the Artist Athlete podcast, founder of theartistathlete.com. We have a really good episode coming up for you, prepared for you today. This whole little section of the podcast I've been calling like the business section. And it's people I've brought on to talk about different aspects of the business side of the circus industry. So 2 weeks ago, we did the social media thing with Shantae Cofield, aka the Movement Maestro. And then last week, we talked about gigging. We talked about how much do you charge, how much do you make, how do you make offers and get jobs with entertainment companies, and how do you run an entertainment company. And we did that with Eileen Reynolds of Circus Boss. And this week, we're going to talk about the artsy-fartsy making your own circus show. Maybe not quite as artsy-fartsy as I'm kind of making it sound, but we're talking about visions that you want to see because nobody else has put them out yet, and it's your idea, and what does it take to go from a seedling of an idea to growing into a big old tree of a show? How do you get the money for it? How do you spend the money for it? Where do those good ideas come from? And how do you find the right people to act on those good ideas? Before we get into all that, though, I just want to make sure I give a shout out to my Patreons who give small amounts of money every single month to help this podcast go out for free to everyone who wants to listen. That's right. This podcast is in your ears right now because some amazing, generous human out there went to www.patreon.com/theartistathlete and they were like, yeah, I love this. I want this to be free for the entire circus community. I want it to get better. I want to keep building it. And so they became a part of my Patreon. And I am so thankful to each and every one of you. I've got some special surprises coming down the pipelines for you guys. So if you're not a Patreon yet, now is the time to get in on it because it's about to get very exciting up in there. So again, patreon.com/theartistathlete. So that's how I cover the expenses of producing this podcast. How will you cover the expenses of your show? Did you hear that segue there? Pretty bomb, huh? I know. To answer the questions about production, I turned to the independent circus production team of Lyndsay and Josh Aviner, who run a dance circus and multimedia production company called the Hideaway Circus. The company's original theatrical productions include an all-American open-air touring circus titled Stars Above, an off-Broadway two-time drama desk-nominated show, Beyond Babel, a critic's pick of the New York Times described as astonishing and irresistible, and the genre-defying slasher circus nightclub experience, Slumber, described by Time Out New York as contemporary, sexy, and a little bit dangerous. Yes. In 2018, the company created a series of circus and dance experiences designed specifically to be watched in a virtual reality headset. Josh and Lyndsey also have a circus podcast. They're some OGs. They have released over 100 episodes of their podcast, which is called the Hideaway Circus podcast. It started in 2015, and the show features industry news analysis and interviews with creators in the circus, dance, and theater arts. I was actually interviewed on their podcast on episode 106, so if you want to hear more of me talking as the interviewee instead of the interviewer, you should go listen to that at hideawaycircus.com, but not before you listen to my interview with Lyndsay and Josh Aviner of the Hideaway Circus. Josh and Lyndsey of the Hideaway Circus podcast, and so much more. Welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Thanks, Shannon. Awesome to be here.
I know. I'm excited to do this, for real again.
I know. We've had so many attempts at it, but we will prevail. I'm very excited. I kind of want to ask you guys individually because I feel like you have really different stories as to how you came to circus. So could you, maybe Josh go first and then Lyndsey, explain who you are and what you do and a little bit of like how you got there?
Sure. So I saw Cirque du Soleil as a kid when I was 10. It was the first circus I saw. It was Dralian. And after walking out of the tent, I was like, okay, that's the thing for me. I got to be part of the circus somehow. And I just knew it. And I was taking gymnastics classes at the time. And my next door neighbor, Sebastian Can, who's now a circus dramaturg that some people know, had found Circus Smirkus, which is a camp and youth program up in Vermont. And that's really what got me into circus. For school, after high school, I went to NYU to Tisch, not dissimilar from you, Shannon, although I was in the film program while you were in the acting program.
Why did you do the film program?
You know, I never really felt like an actor, and theater was never that attractive to me. But I had a teacher in high school who was a film teacher who was my favorite teacher, and he helped me make a documentary about Circus Smirkus, which is what I used to apply to NYU Film School. And I kind of felt like learning to produce independent films is kind of like learning to produce and direct independent circus shows. Some things about it are similar, others aren't. But the best part was like moving to New York City, of course. And I worked as a performer at the Box, which is a nightclub some folks know. And after undergrad, I kind of realized that like I didn't really have that like dying passion to perform. Like I liked doing it. But as I said at the time to somebody who asked me, like I was only on stage for like 4 or 5 minutes. But when I was doing like casting stuff or trying to like help people on the business side, that was like all day. And it was much more encompassing and exciting. I worked for a company called Spiegelworld for quite a good chunk for 2 or 3 years in between undergrad at NYU and grad school at Columbia. I worked on their shows in Las Vegas and a show called Empire that's in New York. The one in Vegas most people know is Absinthe, and I was doing a bit of casting for that. And after that, I was kind of like, still didn't really feel like I knew how to produce things and how to make a budget and how to read legal documents and that kind of stuff. So I applied to this program at Columbia specifically for theater management and producing, which is where I met Lyndsey.
Yeah. The best part of grad school.
Oh, for sure.
But so, yeah, that's why he paid all that money to go find a wife. But so
worth every penny,
right? Worth every single penny. So I started actually horseback riding when I was little and was really into it, had a horse, did show. So I did jumping, hunter jumper is what they call it. And I did a lot of dressage shows, which is, you know, a lot of like the horse crosses from one end of the arena to the other on a diagonal. And it's very specific trotting. And I was obsessed with it. And at some point I got into riding actually because I was getting really badly bullied in 3rd grade, like to the point where I don't actually fully remember it. I think my brain like blocked it out. But my parents,
oh my God.
I know I was thinking the other day, I was like, I really don't remember what she did to me. It was one specific girl. And we ended up, I mean, there was a few reasons we moved, but one of the reasons was this girl was bullying me so bad. And the therapist that my parents brought me to was like, you should get her into horseback riding because it's something that you build confidence with because you're in control. You have to control this animal. You have to learn how to do it. It's singular. And so they did, and I like fell in love with it. And then the other example this person said was do improv or theater. And so my parents were like, sure. So they put me into theater classes, and it took me a while to get into that actually, to get like feel confident in that. But then when I did, I was at the point where I was doing riding shows every weekend, and then I was doing theater every day, and it was like I kind of had to choose. So I chose theater. I did performing arts all through high school. And then when it came to apply to, I did like show choir all through Europe and every summer. So I did a lot of performing arts. I thought that was like my route. And then when we were applying to college, my mom saw that there was an arts management degree that you could get because I never fully wanted to be an actress. I was like, I don't know what this arts management is, but I ended up applying to only colleges where I could do arts management, which I was like, I really don't know what this is, but it sounds like cool, like business and theater. And I only applied to colleges where I could do both arts management and performing arts. So it was hard to I couldn't do a conservatory. But I ended up going to the University of Tampa because I was able to get a Bachelor of Science in Arts Management and a Bachelor of Arts in Musical Theater. And it took me 5 years, but I did it. And I loved every second of it. I was so busy, but it was mainly focused on arts galleries and museums. And I kind of tailored
interesting.
it.
So arts management, but like visual art.
Yes. So not theater, which was also surprising to me. And I was like, but I don't really care about the placement of art paintings in a gallery. But in hindsight, it really made me focus on visual spacing of things and pacing and lighting.
Yes.
And like the mood when you walk into a gallery or a museum, like how do you as a person take it all in so in hindsight, it actually probably helped me a lot. I had to take ceramics and photography and painting and all this other stuff that I wasn't really focused on. But so then I graduated, and at my senior thesis presentation, I got an agent, a New York agent. So I moved to New York and was doing the whole auditioning thing, and I hated it. I hated every second of it. I got an even better agent. I don't know how. And I was like so hesitant to sign the contract. And my mom was like, I think you don't want to be an actor. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right. So that's when I really shifted my focus to arts management,
which everyone
jobs.
who wants to be an actor and is like craving an agent is like hates you, but
exactly. And that's why my mom was like, if this was anyone else of your friends, they'd be like, have signed it already and gone on audition. So like, this should show you something. And that was really the wake up call for me. I was like, yeah, you're right. Like I should just stop. And frankly, I think I'm better at this job than I was as an actor. And so I started working in nonprofit off-Broadway theaters, fundraising for the theaters, specifically from wealthy individuals, and being in charge of their events, their donor communication, fundraising. So it was a really good lesson in how to fundraise for a show. And most of the time, it's a play that I didn't like. So it's also how do you fundraise for a show that you don't believe in, but you believe in the theater. So like, what's the message, So that was really a good lesson. I worked at a few different nonprofits before I finally was like, I want to apply to Columbia and get my degree in commercial producing. So really focus on Broadway and the commercial side of theater. And that is where I met Josh. And it was a program of 10 of us. And he was cute. And he was like, I do circus. And I was like, that's weird and different. And this was 8 years ago. And then, the second week of school, he took me to see my first circus show that, I really had a education on. So that's when my love of circus.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, Circo Mano Vasquez was the first show that we went to.
Vasquez, yeah.
And Universal was the second.
And so what do you guys do now?
So we do a few things. I think if people are looking for labels, I would say producer and creator are two labels that we like to use for ourselves. But after Columbia, we started the podcast that we do, which is not dissimilar from yours, but a little dissimilar. So we also interview people, but our guests tend to be people who've started companies, and we have a real focus on entrepreneurship, I would say, on the podcast. And we joked about this on the episode we did with you where we interviewed you, but we started it to answer questions we were curious about. So we've been doing that for 5 years. So that's a digital medium.
Listeners, yeah, they are the OG podcast. Now, not the first circus podcast ever, but the one that when I was starting the Artist Athlete, I was like, they're doing it too. This is so cool. And listen to every episode. So for sure, go listen to the Hideaway Circus podcast. Wherever you can find the Artist Athlete podcast, you can find their podcast.
Thanks for the plug, Shannon.
There's a little plug for you there. But yeah, so you started the podcast
and we wanted to make shows. I mean, we learned how to make shows in school, but I would say the problem with this degree was that it was so Broadway focused, and everything you were taught was, how do you do a show with $5 million? And you know what? We don't have millions of dollars. So then was really the question of, well, how do we apply this knowledge of how to do things at a really big scale and try to make shows with essentially no money? And the first project we did was a show called Slumber, which we did at a nightclub called House of Yes right when it opened. It's in Brooklyn. And the plot of that show was essentially a girl who hates her best friend, who sort of stabs her in the back and literally ends up.
Well, we were really at the time focused on this idea of who are your real friends, who are the people that will stick by you, who, especially in the arts world, right? It's difficult because, and really theater, it's very hard to root for your friend because it's like, well, I want that job, like we're auditioning for the same show, and I can be happy for you, but I can also be like, oh, I hope I get it. And that like whole feeling of just like shitty friends was where we were focused on. And Kanye West came out with this song, Real Friends. And it was basically talking about like how many of us have real friends. And so we tried to play with this idea of friendship and this girl having this group of friends. And
not to just pause you there. Even before this, though, we had been seeing all these shows together, and they were always all dudes. It was like dudes throw the girl around as the format of the show. And for this, we were really interested in, could we reverse that? So I think it was a cast of 7. Originally, it was 6 girls and 1 guy. So part of it was, can we do a circus show that has the opposite ratio of everything we're seeing? And could we incorporate some of the stuff that we'd been seeing in like our theater classes that we really were excited about? We had just seen the show with loads and loads of blood effects. So we were kind of excited to see if we could incorporate blood effects into a circus show. And since we were doing
circus and blood effects, what more could you possibly want?
What more could you want? And
there's I was also the blood effects guy. Waldo Warshaw is a Broadway blood effects creator, and he created
real wacky dude.
So the one guy in the show is performer Jordan Dawson, who some people might know, and he did a Chinese pole act. And then we had him kind of be a little bit too aggressive with the lead girl. And then there's this like chair. And Waldo built this blood effect into this chair where she basically like straps him to the chair. It was like a more adult show. So she like sexually straps him to the chair. And then she slits his throat. and there was this like huge blood effect. That was so much blood. And the first time he showed us the effect, it looked so real that it honestly, I was like, I might faint. Like, I think this actually looks too real. I think you made it look too real. So then he changed it to look a little bit more campy, which is what we were going for. But it's a funny show because it's definitely not a comfortable show for the audience. It's like what's happening next. And that's kind of what we wanted to bring to it. Sometimes it was successful. Sometimes it could be more successful.
It was interesting. We did it for 4.5 weeks in New York and then took a few weeks off or a few months off and then took it to the Adelaide Fringe in Australia because Jordan Dawson, who we mentioned was the guy, had a lot of connections down there. And we had all these friends who were working in Australia and what a great market this is and what a cool festival and you should come. And we messaged them and they had, yes, we have space. We'll bring you. We'll do this, this, and this to get you out here. And then we went and did it in Australia for 4 weeks and we really learned just how different Australian audiences are. We went from doing it in this super cool nightclub we designed it for to this totally empty cavernous tent. A lot of the humor that like Brooklyn people thought was funny did not land in Australia and needed to be rewritten. So that was it was a lot of fun, but that was kind of our first project. And it was didn't make a lot of money for us, but it was an awesome learning experience. And it was just something to make out of school, just to like speed up a little bit of the things to tick off the things for people who were listening. We, right after that, did a virtual reality experiment experience. We had a little Kickstarter and we put together some of our favorite circus acts and shot it with a 360 camera, kind of harking back to some of the stuff I learned at NYU with the idea of how do you do a show and there's only one person in the audience? Because when you wear a VR headset, it's just you. There's nobody else with you. So how do you create a performance and act with just one person watching? You can find that experience on our website if you want to look it up. And when we were working on Slumber, just taking a step back for a second.
Which is hideawaycircus.com?
It is. Nailed it. And that's where the podcast is too. When we were working on Slumber, the choreographers on that project who we'd hired, Keone and Mari Madrid, at the end of it, were like, man, this was so much fun. We were like, oh, let's do another thing with you guys. This was such a great collaboration. And they said, well, nobody ever wants us to be in things. They only ever want us to hire us to choreograph stuff. And we were like, great. we'll make something for you to be in, which was the genesis of Beyond Babel, which has been the project and the show we've been working on the most the last couple of years. It's mostly a dance show. It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet told through a combination of contemporary and hip hop dance. When people ask me like how it relates to circus, I try to like, for me, it's a single discipline circus show, but the discipline is dance.
Well, it's also nonverbal and telling a story through a nonverbal discipline.
But we opened it in San Diego in a boxing gym that we
But
converted.
is dance circus?
No,
dance
but
circus?
Circus is nonverbal, and it's an art form that has to express something through physicality. And in that sense, dance, specifically this type of dance, is very similar. It's athletic and it's expressing things through physicality and not being able to verbalize it. And in the same way that circus will utilize lyrics of a song or music in general to convey a mood or specific lyrics, that's also what we do with a dance show. So using the music to further the plot, to set the mood of the moment, to clarify things. I think like music is overlooked a lot in circus and in dance shows. And when you can see a show that's 2 hours, no speaking, but have a full detailed story. I mean, not as detailed, obviously, as if it's a play or a musical where you have specific words, but you can really get across a full narrative. And in that sense, it's super similar to what you can learn doing circus.
Dance is like the older sister, older brother to circus. I think they're like in the same family and related, but
they're like maybe
siblings.
Like cousins that are like weird cousins, but they're.
I feel like opera's the weird cousin or something.
Yeah, maybe.
Dance is like closer. But we did this dance show in California for 9 months. We took 9 months off. Then we brought it to New York, opened it off Broadway, had it running for about 8 weeks before the pandemic hit. Shut it down on March 13th.
We got a New York Times Critics Pick and 2 Drama Desk nominations. So
yeah, that
was
the culmination of our producing, creating to date, certainly by the way people received it. But now the lights are still on the grid, the costumes are still backstage, the set is getting dust on it. So we'll be reopening that show sometime in the fall once it's safe to return to being indoors. And in the meantime, we're sort of figuring out what we can do this summer outdoors. So yeah, we produce stuff, we make podcasts, some stuff we direct, other stuff we don't direct.
And sometimes we also will produce someone else's work. So we did this amazing performer, Amy Saunders, Misbehave. She did the Misbehave game show. She was taking around the fringe festivals in Australia and Europe and got the opportunity to take it and sit down in Las Vegas at Bally's Casino. This is a few years ago. So we ended up helping produce that show. But, not hands-on. We weren't the lead. But love Amy. And then Brett Pfister was the other person in that show who's been an old friend of ours. So we sometimes will help on other people's projects too, but mainly create our own.
Do you guys have any other job? Is like Hideaway your like sole everything you do income? That's how you're paying the bills, keeping the lights on?
Once Babel got going, then it became a full-time job because Babel was making money from the start, which was 2017. But prior to that, we were doing like a lot of side hustles. So my main side hustle after school was doing casting for special events, and Lyndsey's was doing galas, which again, they were really part-time kinds of gigs. The problem with starting out with this kind of stuff is that these shows don't run forever. So you make money and income for 2 months, and then you're like, okay, what do I do for the next 4 months before the next thing opens? So that's really been a balancing act. And then of course during the pandemic, it's essentially unemployment, like most people who are on that. But no, I would say by 2017, it was enough to be 2 full-time jobs for us.
Amazing. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I think I don't know if a lot of people, but I think some people kind of think arts management or they go in the business side of performing arts and they assume that that's going to mean more job security being behind the curtain or behind the tent flap rather than being in the lights.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of different facets that you can go into as far as arts management. Producing is one of them, but a lot of our peers and friends went into general management. Again, there's more opportunities for these types of jobs in theater because it's more segmented. Like in circus, a lot of the circus owners, producers do their own general management or have someone in-house. But in theater, you can have the general management, there's company management, there's stage management, there's the press team, there's the advertising, there's the fundraising team, there's the legal team, there's accounting, there's all these really specific areas that you can go into. And in that sense, there's more job security, other than if it's a global pandemic and everything shuts down. But in general, there is more job security because you can work on 10 shows at once because all these shows need a general manager. So even if one show is in development and years away from Broadway, you might have a show that's going to Broadway next season.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of have this job. But in the circus, I think it's a little similar, but it's not as robust of an industry. So in the same way that theater jobs are. So maybe there's more security slightly, but yeah, I think you're right.
I would say the
not that
only
much.
security is the security you have of not depending on your body. It's depending on your mind instead of your body. So that has pros and cons to it, of course, because my mind is not great at accounting. So it's not like I can depend on my mind to be good at stuff I'm not good at.
That's what I do.
But the benefit is that I don't have to stress about having an injury. So I would say that's a big point of difference.
Oh, hey there. I just wanted to interrupt this interview real quick to just say one real quick little thing about myself, which is that I am not only the host of the Artist Athlete podcast. No. She is a businesswoman, and I run a whole company dedicated to the education and inspiration of circus artists. That goes from people who are just doing it weekend warriors as a hobbyist, recreationally, or if you're a professional, you've put in the hours and you need more resources, go to theartistathlete.com. There are a ton of recorded workshops, online manuals and ebooks, everything you could possibly need from me and from some guests on this show about everything from nutrition to training your shoulders to really specific aerial moves that you need to master. Again, theartistathlete.com. And just because you went there from listening to this podcast, use code PODCAST and get 15% off your entire purchase. That's right. Theartistathlete.com. Use code PODCAST at checkout for 15% off your entire purchase. And have a great day. Back to the episode. All right. So then my question is, you've labeled yourself producers, like an artist arts, a creator creates, a producer produces. What are the actions that go under that job label? I feel like it's pretty straightforward to know what a performer does. A director has a vision and executes the onstage mise en scene, if you will. But what is a producer's job?
Well, there's varying degrees of producer, and that's also a confusing term in a way, because some people just are the money and bring the money, and that's their job as the producer.
It's really, their title is investor, but nobody wants to be called investor. They want to have something nicer. So often you'll see on a Broadway show producer, and there'll be like 15 people under producer, and they're actually just investors.
So then
they're just investors. Wait, what's an executive producer? Sorry. Is that only a film thing, like executive producer?
So it's a little confusing because terms in theater and terms in film are reverse. So in theater, executive producer is more like what we do. You're the lead producer and doing the actual job, not fundraising. In film and television, it's the opposite. So executive producer usually means studio head, which means they're just the one funding it.
When you raise money in theater, you have to have a lot of different levels because people can give, they have units. So it's like the minimum unit is $50,000 to be in this show. And the maximum is there is no maximum because you're like, you want to fund the whole show, but you have to have these levels, right? So it's like, if you give a ton of money, you are above the title, executive producer. If you're even more than that, you're a co-producer. If you're less than that, you're an associate producer. And then if you have just 50K, you're probably not even listed. So, I mean, it's like this whole hierarchy of names for fundraising. So then you also have the creative producers who are, much less common. There's not that many of them because those people are the ones that have an idea and then can shepherd that idea to fruition. And a lot of people, don't want to do that. And they're just like, okay, I have this writer that I love. I'm going to produce their show and I'm going to get the money to help them bring that vision to life. And that is super valid as a driving force as a producer. Josh and I are more like, okay, we have this idea, let's create it. So then we will assemble the team. So like hire the right director. Well, most of the time we direct it, but hire the right choreographer, scenic designer, costume designer, musicians, composer, artists. So while we're doing that, we're also fundraising and getting the money, finding the space, doing the accounting, getting all the legal work ready to open up the business to take in money. Selling tickets. We're also doing marketing and advertising, creating the ads ourselves, hiring a photographer to take photos. Although for Slumber, we did all the photos too. So it's like, basically, if you can think of it as this like family tree, we're like at the top of it and we're putting the roots down for all of the stuff that needs to happen for it to, at the bottom, create this show. And some producers, I think, start like tangentially to this family tree and start with a writer or a director who has a vision. And then that person is kind of like the leading artistic voice. And and so there's a few different types of producers, and finding the right type of producer for your project is the key.
One more thing I would add to help people who are trying to understand it in other metaphors is that my favorite thing I learned at NYU is the producer is the first person on the project and the last person on the project. So you're the person who's going to open the company and start the idea before anybody does it. And when everybody's left, you're the one who's filing the paperwork for the company is closed. It is all over. So you're there for the full length of the journey. And then one last piece of clarification. The job of the producer in circus is different from the job of the producer in theater or in dance or in film. They're all kind of similar. Like we said, like the titles are there. They're doing a similar kind of thing. But in circus, the fundamental difference most of the time is that you are both the venue and the show. So you're usually the tent and you're the show inside the tent, and you're responsible for both those things. While in theater, there's usually a theater owner and then a show that goes into that theater. So in theater, the producer's only in charge of the show. In circus, more often, they're also in charge of the venue.
It sounds like being a producer is a lot easier if you have a lot of money.
Yes, but there's a hilarious and very true saying is the way to make a small fortune producing is to start with a large fortune, which is that like it is not easy to make money doing it. I think the ratio in New York is like 1 in 4 things return their money, and like 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 are profitable. So it's very easy to be a producer, but it's very hard to make a living as a producer because you have to beat that 1 in 4 ratio. So kind of like we were saying earlier, there are these producers who I want to do a show. So they put money into it, but maybe they've never actually done it. So you have actually quite a high failure rate among producers, except those that are creative producers and do this for a living actually have closer to like 1 in 2 make money, or it's.
I also think that there's this inflation of costs that people think they need to produce a show. And when you have no funds to start with, like for Slumber, we did it as cheaply as possible. I washed the bloody clothes every single night. Like I found the costumes at thrift stores around Brooklyn. I think I spent $500 on all the costumes, just like every day going. And because we were so driven to make this show, but make it as cheaply as possible. And I think sometimes you're told you need to make things more like, oh, I need $1,000 for 70 grand. Oh, I need this for blank. But like, do you? Is there a way that you could do the same artistic vision cheaper and it doesn't detract from the art? Do you need that? Like, I think we always are like, well, is this necessary? Like, do we need this, or is it just a thing that we think would be better? And maybe it would be better, but do we need it to tell the story, to do the show? And I think that's where it's like, oh, these budgets are getting so big.
But, also with this, maybe we've made it sound like you raise all of this money up front and then you have this big show. With Beyond Babel, we were raising money for that the whole life of it. So when we did it originally, we had 12 lights in the ceiling and 96.
Excuse me, we had 14.
14 lights in the ceiling we bought at Guitar Center, and had like less than 100 cues times the lights changed during the show. And after we did it in San Diego and it was successful and people saw it and gave us more money, then when we came to New York, we had how many lights?
We had 97.
97 lights and like 3,000 lighting cues. So, it doesn't all happen at once. That happened over a 2-year period of upgrading the show to a better and better and better point. So part of producing is continuing to fix your show and make it better as you go. Slumber ran out of money. Like Slumber we did in Australia and didn't make enough money. We made enough money to come home, but not enough money to like send it to another fringe. So, it's not everything is equally successful as other things are.
It's kind of like you mentioned 1 and 2 if you're a creative producer, 1 and 5 or 6 if you're just putting money in. Lyndsey, it also makes me think of what you were talking about, money and how much things cost. It reminds me of, I took one producing class that was like an elective in the BFA program at Tisch. But the woman she produced like Toronto Shakespeare Festival and a bunch of other stuff. She was great. But I remember her saying, if you can't tell your story with like a trash bag and a cardboard box, why should I give you $5 million? It was, and like that is,
oh my God, that's such a good,
so good, right?
She should tell so many people that.
Yeah. It really stuck with me. And even like now when people are like, we don't have the budget, I'm like, well, what does that what does that matter? However, my question is, what does it matter for? Like, what are the non-negotiable things as a producer that you're like, yes, we have to spend money on this?
Well, just going back to what you said about that lady's advice, which is so good. Also, a bad idea is never going to be good no matter how much money you throw at it.
Yeah.
Like if the starting genesis of the show is just not right, nothing is going to make it better. No amount of lights, no amount of money at costumes, no amount of amazing artists is going to make it what it needs to be successful and run for a long time. So I think like that's
what is a bad idea? Like, how do you know?
Well, a lot of source material. Yeah. Yes. I mean, so
you can't always know.
You can't always know. I've been right like 8 out of 10 times on when I call. So one of my jobs before going to Columbia, I was working for a Broadway producer, and I would read scripts and say, yes, I think this show is worth looking at and investing in, or no, I don't think it's going to be good. And I basically called every single one. Also with a musical, don't listen to the music. Read the script first, because the music can be amazing, but if the script sucks, the music's never going to make up for it. And I was right on everything except one show called If Then, which was a Broadway musical with Idina Menzel and Anthony Rapp. And I was like, and it was written by the people who wrote Next to Normal. And I was like, this is amazing. This is going to be so good. It was so bad. And it didn't make its money back. And that was the one time I was wrong. But I was distracted by the music and the singers, But the stories, I think,
Idina Menzel, come on.
Right.
I know, right?
Right. You're like, yeah, that's amazing. And it was not good. But
one of the things is to answer the question of what should you spend money on, you should try to do as much as you can do yourself as possible. Like if you can take your own photos, or if you can do marketing, or if you can do anything you can do, you should do yourselves, except for, I would say, PR and legal things. So we never do our own publicity. We always hire a publicist for the shows because that's a business all about connections. So we spend a few $1,000s on each show hiring somebody who will get us the New York Times to come review it and will get us an article on this website and on this website. And that, I would say, is something you should just pay for. And then the other thing that I think one sort of just has to pay for and not do themselves is the legal part of setting up your business originally and getting good advice on what to do. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I have to be a nonprofit, or people just don't really know, essentially. They think like, oh, I see them, they're a nonprofit, or like, oh, there's an LLC, or maybe I can do it myself. So getting good advice from a lawyer on, well, this is like the kind of show I want to make, and like this is how I want to do it, and somebody being like, okay, this is how you set it up so that you're legally doing it correctly. Those two things I don't think you can really do yourself and be successful at it.
And then I think you can get smart at that. So if you pay a good lawyer and we have our lawyer, I love our lawyer. We met him at grad school. He spoke at a class and I was like, he is so awesome. And I emailed him after. I was like, we have this project. It's so small. Would you be interested in helping us with it? And we forged a relationship with him over these 7 years. He's worked on every one of our shows and we really trust him. And I think that's also important with someone that you're going to hire and our press team too. Like we really have a relationship with them now and they understand us and we understand them and they understand like where we like to spend money, where we don't. And so with our lawyer, I had him draft the original contracts for the artists and the designers. And then from then I've just basically tailored it to what we need for each new show. So maybe you spend the money once, but then you can be creative in how you make those last longer than just that one time that you had to spend the money. So also I enjoy doing contracts. Not very many people do. And so I'm like, yeah, let me do the contracts, although Josh's been doing them recently. But so thinking about where to spend money and then how to make that money go further.
One more thing on like the money front that is a bit of a misnomer. So when we were trying to figure out who we wanted as a lighting designer for our shows, we'd seen this guy, Jeff Kreuter, who we've interviewed on our podcast, who's a Tony Award-winning lighting designer. And when we were telling people who knew him that we wanted to work with Jeff, they were like, oh my God, Jeff is so expensive. Like he uses so many lights. Like that's really going to add to your budget. And if we'd stopped there, we would have been like, oh no, we can't work with Jeff. Jeff's really expensive. So we were like, okay. And then, we messaged Jeff, became friends with him. And then we were like, hey, here's actually all the money we can spend. Is that okay? He's like, yeah, sure. I can work within a budget. No problem. So it's a little bit of like, you have to kind of find out yourself, like you have to go through all the steps of figuring out if somebody will work with what you're able to provide them with resources wise, and not just to assume that you can't do it because it's too expensive, because somebody might like what you're doing and want to be part of it, even if it's less than they would make on Broadway.
So we've talked a lot about financial capital and that aspect of producing. We've lightly touched on the creative capital aspect of producing, which is where I was going with my bad idea question.
Oh,
How do you know if something's a bad idea? It sounds like, Lyndsey, you had a job that gave you a lot of experience in knowing like your taste level and what could actually be profitable,
viable,
viable. That word, very that. What other aspects of creative capital are there?
What that means to me is like your creative credibility, essentially. So when I say like, okay, I'm going to make a show that's got lots of campy blood effects, and you go, campy blood effects, that like I have personal capital in my own creativity because I've won awards, or because you are my friend, or because you've seen my shows, that you're willing to go on this like journey with me and believe in my vision or our vision and roll with that. So I don't know if that's what you mean by creative capital, but when I hear that word, that's really what I think of it.
Yeah, I think.
I think there's a lot of different. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you go, Shannon.
Well, I think there's a lot of different aspects to creative capital, right? There's like proof of concept, which is a little bit more what you're talking about, like the ability to produce something. But I think it can't even be underestimated that the idea of even thinking about like, I want a campy show with a lot of cool blood effects, like to have that idea is not something that everyone has. The aspect of creative capital that is truly like the creative part of it, the thinking of the ideas, the knowing what will work, or getting really obsessed with an idea. Like, how do you come up with these ideas? How do you spend that time? What does that look like for you two?
I think this first step is really, I know it's like cliche, everyone says it, but like seeing a lot of stuff is so helpful. And it's not just about seeing the work, it's about feeling the audience's reaction with the work. And when audiences are excited by things, when they're not, like what plays well for what market, what is not working well, is really like was my job for so long. And it helped because I was like, okay, you may love an idea, but is there an audience for it? And if there isn't, what's the point of doing it? And that's a more commercial thinking than nonprofit. Nonprofit is like, I want to create this work. This is me as an artist. I'm going to put it out there. It doesn't really matter if there's an audience, really, right? Because it's not about returning funds. In commercial work, it's like, who's going to like this show? And so Josh and I kind of come from the point of what shows haven't we seen that we want to see?
Yes, we only make stuff that we would want to see because it is so much work and so much drama and pain, particularly when things aren't going well, that to produce something that you don't want to see is a waste of your time. Like the first thing is it's got to be something you desperately want to see yourself. Like I really wanted to see this Campy Blood show. I really wanted to see Keone and Mari star in a dance show in this genre for Beyond Babel. The first place though we always start creatively is music, like Spotify, making playlists of like, oh, the lyric in that song is so good, or this sound is so good, and it will trigger ideas for themes, but also just absorbing the world. But what was that couple who you saw?
Okay, so we always start with something, but then you ruminate on an idea for a while and think. If you keep coming back to it, that's when you can be like, I am really into this idea. If you kind of like say it and leave it, maybe not so much. Or maybe you say an idea and it's not something that comes to fruition for years and years. But so this, there was this Broadway couple, Amanda Klutz and Nick Cordero. And Nick, they moved to, I actually saw them in Bullets Over Broadway. And they moved to LA. They just had a baby named Elvis, bought a house, and he got COVID. And I was like on this journey with her and him. And like, it was a few months of just like hoping he would get out of the hospital. He was like 40, totally healthy, got COVID, went on this horrible journey, was in the like in a coma, lost his leg. I mean, really a horrible journey. And every day she was posting about it. And I just felt like I was with her on this journey and like hoping and praying for him to be okay. And he came out of it and then it looked like it was going to be good. And then he ended up dying. And it was just like, oh, what a experience. And why do you go through something like that just to have it not work out? And
all this like life they had planned together, you know, that would have happened otherwise. So after seeing that, we started thinking about those themes. And then it becomes, well, how do we talk about that through circus or through dance? And, you know, Lyndsey and I are both very allergic to shows that like are too on the nose, where, you know, you go to BAM here and you see a circus show about climate change and they're just saying the word climate change 1,000 times. It's like, I get it. You know, I agree with it, but there's maybe a more subtle way to deliver that message. Particularly if you want to convince people who don't agree with you already, better to do it like kind of sideways where they connect with it without realizing it than to be like right on the nose. So, you know, for example, in this talking about the futures that didn't happen, the people who we've lost, it's like, okay, that's a theme. And here's some music, here's some creators we want to work with, here's a place we want to do it.
Well, and Billie Eilish's brother, Phineas, who produces all of her songs with her, he wrote a song and also inspired by Amanda and Nick. And when I heard it, I was like, oh my God, Josh, this is the show. This is the theme. Like, and we were just sitting one night listening to all these songs, imagining futures that never happened or never were because of where we're at as a global pandemic, all the futures that will never happen because of this crazy virus. And, it's like weddings, baby showers, graduations, trips, just like lives, and starting from a place of music always to us helps set the tone and the vibe of like where we're going.
And then casting is next. Once you have the concept and maybe where you'll do it and when you'll do it, and you have some ideas artistically, then it becomes, well, who else is involved? And for circus, that becomes casting circus acts. For things like dance, that usually means the choreographer next, because they, not always, but often the choreographer will have dancers they regularly work with. So it's a little bit different for everything.
And I think like just going back to this idea of like a creative capital, it's like if you are going down this route, which is awesome, and you're creating this show, but then you cannot figure out where you would do it or who would come see it. That's when you're like, I don't know if the show is ready for the world yet. Like maybe it's just not the right time for it, because if you really try to like fit a show into a landscape that isn't ready for it, it's just not going to ever be successful, even if it's a wonderful show, and
sometimes you'll open it and there'll be big problems that are fixable. So the show is not being written once performances begin. Usually the first month or two, we're changing it a lot still. Once we see the reactions to the audience, you can think in your head, oh my God, this is gonna kill, this is such a good idea, this choreography where they cross the stage this way, everyone's gonna love it, and then you do it and like no one's clapping and you're like, that did not work. We need to rewrite that.
That's also one thing that is, I think, easier for us rather than like a writer, is like to not be so precious with your ideas and know when it's just not working. So Slumber, we had this awesome idea for an opening number, and we did it the first time for an audience and literally crickets. Like it like
we were so sure it was going to be also the best hitting scene in the whole in like the 70 minutes we were like, this 4-minute chunk is like the so best good. Chunk, and it was definitely the worst
and we were
chunk.
So into it. Even in rehearsals it was like, this is awesome. And then first night bombed the opening number, and then it takes a while to get the audience back on your side, right? Because the audience is like, I don't know about this show, and it takes a while for them to come back.
Especially if you bomb the opening number.
The opening number.
Yes.
And maybe that was just the first audience. Like, let's watch it again. Oh, tanked the second night, and then the four of us, me, Josh, Keone, Mari, were like, okay, this is really, we need to fix this. So then we went home. The four of us rethought the opening, redid it, re-rehearsed it before the show that night, put it in the third night, and it killed. And it was so good. And everyone was like, oh my God. And then they were on our side through the rest of the show, and the show was much better. So I think also like part of being, having this quote unquote creative capital is being able to listen and know when something isn't working and not just try to keep making it work, change it, and it's like nothing wrong with it. It's great. You have bad ideas, you have good ideas, but if you keep with the bad ideas, or you think it's a good idea, but it's actually not a good idea for the audience, then change it. And that's where it gets rough, when it's like, well, this is true to me. This is true to my story. It's like, that's great. But if it's not translating to the audience who's buying tickets and will then tell people to buy a ticket, then it doesn't really matter. So, but that's again, a more commercial thinking than a nonprofit thinking.
What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career? And I'll have you guys answer this separately, because I feel like the beginning of your career could mean different things for both of you. And I'm interested in your answers.
Ooh, tough. I would say the big piece of advice is to be careful in taking advice, essentially, and try to be able to recognize what's good and bad advice. And the example of that I could give is when we were deciding whether or not to do Beyond Babel. We did it for 10 weeks and we made money all 10 weeks. And then we were like, oh, we could do it for another 10. And I called up one producer friend who was like, no, you did it for 10 weeks. It was great. It's a success. Close it, pack it up. And you got a great story. And then we had another producer friend who was like, well, if you're all making money and you're paying the artists, keep going. Like, why would you stop if everybody is being paid and people are liking it? And that's an example of, you have to be very careful which piece of advice to pick. And both these people were like mentor figures to us. So we went, thankfully, with the keep it going. But I think the trick on that is be careful. Be careful with advice. Yeah, that's what I would say.
So mine, it's funny. I think if you asked me this like last week, I don't know if this would have been my answer. But I don't know if you have seen, but there's a lot of news coming out about Scott Rudin, who is the producer in Broadway. He produced every show that you've seen with like a celebrity. He did Book of Mormon. He is a very, very powerful producer. And all these articles came out about all of the people that have worked for him and how abusive he is, mentally, physically, emotionally. And, I've been in the theater industry in New York for over 10 years now, working nonstop, working for a lot of people. And I read the article and it hit home to me because I worked for this Broadway producer once that for literally a day and a half before I quit. And he was super mentally and emotionally abusive, made me sit in a broken chair on purpose. I mean, just like was really bad. And this was when I was really young, starting out. And I emailed advisors, this was when we were at Columbia. And I said, this happened to me this first day. And the message I got back was, well, you don't want to burn a bridge. You can't quit. You need to keep working and then say that it's just too much for you to do. It's too much on your plate and resign and make sure he has another person ready to go before you quit because you don't want to burn a bridge. And I was like, of course. And then the next day he was awful, like mentally abusive. And I quit immediately. And I'm so proud of myself for quitting. And that guy has had no effect on my life ever. He's not kept me from getting work. He's not stopped me from doing something. And I think there's a fine line between working hard and working for hard people, which I definitely have, and working and learning and being better and being respectful and polite and doing a good job is one part, but being mentally and emotionally abusive to an employee is a totally separate thing that you don't need to stand for. So like for me, I was so worried about burning these bridges with these people in this industry, but I stood up for myself and it had no effect. And I think at that moment I was so scared. I was starting my career. And I think like for those, if I could give myself advice, it's like, you're going to make it on your own and you don't need to work with assholes. You don't need to put yourself through mental and physical turmoil to get ahead. So that would be my advice to anyone who is in the industry who's working for an asshole.
That's amazing advice. What an enabling structure to be like, no, make sure you like have someone else to replace you.
Yeah.
Goes back to the bad advice thing. It's like you just, you can't just trust people because they're authority figures. You got to listen to them, but they aren't necessarily right.
Yeah.
Which I feel like the overarching kind of theme of this episode has kind of been about this ability to be able to distinguish what works.
Yeah.
Like creatively when you're reading scripts or when you're taking advice from other people, like having that thing within you that kind of can be its own compass or barometer.
And honestly, the podcast has been a tremendous asset, as I'm sure it has been for you as well. Like listening to loads of people give free advice and how they made decisions about their own life and their own journey. And both our podcasts are totally free to listen to. Other people can go through it. But I think that definitely has helped, because you hear other people's similar stories and you apply other people's lessons to your own life.
Yeah. And just, I think maintaining being a nice human being and a good person with good intentions can be your guiding light. And if someone is not being that, then you don't need to surround yourself with that. And that goes for a bad idea too. A bad idea on a bad project can be a bad working environment. And sometimes you learn stuff on those projects and sometimes you don't, and you don't need to be a part of it. So that's like the feeling of always say yes is sometimes I think a bad advice.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the yes is a no.
Yeah.
I'll work on that. But you go. Yeah. Josh and Lyndsey, thank you guys so much for coming on the Artist Athlete podcast.
Shannon, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for having us.
I know, I'm like sad our podcasts are over.
Do you want to do like a fifth take maybe? I've been enjoying these.
Yeah, for sure. That was my interview with Lyndsey and Josh from the Hideaway Circus. I think hopefully by the end of this episode, we're all a little clearer on what a producer actually does. As I asked in the episode, so a performer performs, a creator creates, I guess a producer produces. And so because they produce something, their job can mean a lot of different things. It can be a person who raises funds. It can be a person who just gives the funds. Or in Josh and Lyndsey's case, it's a person who has the creative vision, hires the team, and raises the money to make the idea happen. What I love about their story and why I wanted to have them on the podcast is that they're so relatable. You know, it's not like we had Steve Smith on a very long time ago with Ringling, who has budgets of millions of dollars. But in Lyndsey and Josh's case, they don't have millions of dollars to throw around and fund a show, but they find ways to make it work by making deals with really good lighting designers or hand-washing costumes themselves. And a really great tip that Lyndsey dropped when she was talking about budgets and producing is asking the question, okay, we want this. We want someone to wash the clothes for us, but do we need someone to wash our costumes to tell the story better? Using funds, using the money that's raised to do the things that tell the story better are the first priority, and then everything else comes after. You should try to do as much as you can reasonably yourself. The things that you probably can't do unless you are a lawyer is contracts and being a lawyer, and then having a good PR team, really knowing how to market, who to reach out to, those kinds of things are the two things that they advise that you probably invest some money in. And as for the people you hire, your creative team, don't be afraid to ask. Even if someone has a reputation for being a little more expensive. Josh and Lyndsey, for example, told the story of hiring a lighting designer. And they just said, this is our budget. And the lighting designer was like, sure, I can work with that budget. But you'll never know unless you ask. And this goes into Josh's final point, and I think Lyndsey's as well, is that you kind of have to take your own advice and listen and curate your own inner compass on some of these issues, because it's really hard to know right from wrong, what you're doing well, what you're doing not. And you never really know unless you try, but getting a lot of experience, seeing a lot of different shows, having opinions, listening to what the audience around you and how they're responding to the shows will start to help you develop an understanding of what people like and, more importantly, what you like. An understanding of your own creative capital, your own ability to take ideas, your own ability to have ideas, your own ability to take the time to see what it would require to translate ideas into reality in the form of shows. Or maybe it's just in the form of an act if you're an individual artist that you want to sell. This idea, this question they asked at the end, what shows haven't we seen that we want to see? Circus with a whole bunch of blood, or a dance circus show, or virtual reality. Those were some of Josh and Lyndsey's answers. What are some of yours? If you want to see more from Josh and Lyndsey, go to thehideawaycircus.com. They have all of their trailers up, and they also have their excellent podcast, which I am a guest on, and a ton of other people. Guys, if you like the Artist Athlete podcast, the Hideaway Circus podcast is similar, not quite the same, but similar enough where you will love it. It's interviews with movers and shakers in the dance, theater, and circus world. And they also do really cool things. They do kind of like current news and what's going on in the industry. So they've got really their thumb on the pulse of a lot of that kind of work. So hideawaycircus.com and check out their podcasts. And if you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at _artist_athlete. My website's theartistathlete.com. I'm on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. I'm on TikTok, _artist_athlete, if you want to see like my cats. And then if you love what you're listening to and you want to donate, you want to help out the cause, patreon.com/theartistathlete is the place to go. Thanks for listening, and I will talk at you next week, friends, fans, and foes. The Artist Athlete Podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, my name is Noah and I do hand balancing. Hi, my name is Woody and I do Leo. Thank you for listening to the Artist Athlete Podcast.
Hi, I'm Freya. You can hear my whole story in episode 50 of the Artist Athlete Podcast, but I'm here to tell you about something else that I do. I'm a qualified health and nutrition coach. I help people with sleep and body confidence, among other things. You can see everything I have to offer at wildguidance.com or follow me on Instagram at wildguidance.
Hi everyone, I'm Dominique, a ground acrobat, trapeze artist, and coach, currently bringing circus to the extremely cold but very beautiful Northern Ontario, Canada. Circus has changed my life and I'm so grateful to everyone in this community. Find me on Instagram at DomUpsideDown or my website domupsidedown.com.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete Podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and swing and rope by night. I really like the Artist Athlete Podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete Podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete Podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.